We're just going to take the next few minutes in order to look at some of the different ways that we could make an image look more vintage. Now, obviously, the subject matter is going to really help make the image look vintage. So here I've got an image of an old barn. Now, a few of the things that we can do would be to crop the image. So if we were trying to make this maybe look more like it was a Polaroid, then we'd want to crop it to a square. In order to crop this, I can click and hold on the crop tool and set the aspect ratio to say 1:1, and then click and drag out the crop, tapping the Enter key in order to apply that crop. Now, if I wanted to add a white border around this, I could go over to the Effects panel, and then I would use the Amount slider all the way to the right. I would decrease the feather so that it's a hard edge. I would also decrease the roundness, and then I can adjust the midpoint depending on how thick of a border I want. Now, I don't really want this to be cropped, so I'm going to return back to the crop tool. I'm going to click and hold, and then I'm just going to set it to the original crop. I'll still have that border because the post-crop vignette will readjust based on the crop of my image. Some other things that we might want to take a look at in the basic panel, most vintage images, they don't really have a strong black in them. So I might want to ease up on the black point here. Or if you're trying to make an image that maybe was photographed with a snapshot camera, you might want to think of going the other way, because a lot of times if it was a really high contrast scene that was photographed, you're not going to get a lot of detail in those shadow areas. So you can move the black slider over to the left to purposely force that detailed shadow area to pure black. But in this case, I'm going to move it over to the right and just lighten the whole image a bit. Then we can also add in some color casts and desaturate the image. If I want to desaturate everything in the image, I could use vibrance and saturation, but we have a lot more control if I scoot over to HSL and grayscale. Since I'm going to desaturate, I'm going to use the targeted adjustment tool. I'll select saturation, and I'm going to click in the reds and drag down. And we could also add the yellows to that. If you've ever looked at maybe a printed piece of material that is in a window, for example, you'll notice that the reds and the yellows seem to fade a lot more quickly than your blues and your purples. So I think the blue here is still a little bit too vibrant, so I will click and just drag down to decrease the vibrance there. Of course, if I don't like this blue, I can move over to the hue panel and then click and drag down in order to change the hue maybe more towards cyan, or I can drag up to bring it a little bit more towards the purple range. All right, if I wanted to add a color cast in either the shadows or the highlights, I could move over to the split toning. I'm going to add a little bit of blue in the shadows, so I'll hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows and then drag the hue slider over to the right. Then I'll let go of the Option key and just dial in the amount of saturation that I want to add as blues in those shadow areas. And I might add a little bit of yellow to my highlight. So again, holding down the Option key or the Alt key, dragging over to my yellows, and then dialing in the amount of saturation that I want to just kind of dim down those highlights and add that color. Then I can use the Balance slider. If I want more blue, I'll move to the left. If I want more of the yellow, I can move to the right. Now, we've made a lot of global changes, but I can also make local changes. If I switch to my radial filter, this is a great way to add a vignette to the image, even though I've already got a post-crop vignette on there. And of course, because it's the radial filter, I can actually locate this anywhere I want, so it could be off-center. I will click and drag out. Then we'll take a look at what settings were loaded. Looks like I've got a desaturation of -100. I'll double click on that in order to reset it. And instead, I'll just pull the exposure down outside of the radial filter. A lot seems to be happening in the inside as well. So let's just scroll down, and I'm going to lessen the feather, which means that more of the area inside of the radial filter will be affected. In fact, if we want to see a mask of that, here's the mask with the feather set down at 0, and here it is at 100. So we can see that I'm finding kind of a nice middle ground there where this area of the image is not being affected, and the slowly fading where this area then is 100% affected. And of course, I can grab the pen and I can reposition this anywhere in the image that I want. I can change it from a circle to an oval, and I could even rotate this if I want it to be more at an angle. I'll just reposition it over this first lantern, turn off the mask, and let's go ahead and switch to my graduated filter. Here I'm going to load this before I paint with it. I'll load it with a positive exposure. I might just want to add maybe like a little bit of a light leak down there in the lower corner. I'll just refine that and bring up the exposure, and I can add multiple instances of the graduated filter, so I could click and drag down from the right as well. And of course, I could go in and I could use my adjustment brush as well. Maybe I want to change the color temperature, making one area warmer and another area cooler. So I'll increase the color temperature, double click on the exposure, get a larger brush by using the right bracket key. And I might just want to make this area right here a little warmer. And to add some color contrast, I'll click New, change the color temperature so that it's cooler, and click down here in the right. Now, I think that's a little bit too much, so let's bring back the color temperature a little bit. I could also scroll down. I could change the clarity, making some areas less sharp than others. I could also decrease the sharpness. And I could add a color anywhere I want by clicking on the color swatch and maybe choosing a different color. I'm going to go ahead and leave this set to white though. Click OK. And now we'll just tap the P key. The P key will show me what this looked like originally and our vintage effect that we just created. Of course, at any point in time, we can go back and modify this. If I don't like something, I can either modify the adjustments or just tap the delete key in order to remove it. So there we go. I'll tap the P key again. There's before and after. And that's how you quickly add a vintage look to an image in Camera Raw.